Hi and welcome to Prepping Essentials. A global pandemic is one of the more likely something hit the fan scenarios that could occur. The World Health Organization, scientists from government agencies and aid agencies, along with scientists from commercial organizations and pharmaceutical companies, all agree that it's not a case of if a pandemic might strike, but when. So the question is, are you ready? Let's find out. Over the last few years, it seems that disease epidemics or pandemics just keep on occurring in different places around the world. Each seems to get bigger than the last one. Over the last couple of years, Ebola has been in and out of the news quite frequently as the disease spread around Africa, seemed to be contained, but then over recent months seems to have broken out again. And there was a bit of a poignant reminder in the news media here in the UK over the last week when a plane was quarantined on arrival at Gatwick Airport because some of the passengers and several members of the crew fell ill during the flight. There was a huge panic about the possibility of a pandemic and contagious disease being found on the plane. It seems to be a little bit less scary than that, and recent reports suggest it might just be some kind of stomach upset or gastroenteritis that passengers on a cruise liner had brought with them off the ship onto the plane. Whatever the disease eventually turns out to be, it just proves the point of how easy and how quickly a disease in one part of the world can be quickly transported across the globe to another part of the world. Whilst there's no such thing as a nice disease, it's quite possible to overlook the importance of disease and disease control when it comes to prepping. And without wanting to get bogged down into technical detail, it's worthy of just explaining the difference between epidemics and pandemics to give you some kind of perspective and demonstrate the importance of the potential that pandemic has for creating a major disaster. So both epidemic and pandemic indicate the spread of a disease across a defined geographical area. The term epidemic is used when the disease-affected area is confined to a specific city, region, or country, while the term pandemic is used when a disease spreads beyond national borders and possibly across the world, affecting many, many people. Therefore, the death toll in a pandemic is generally much higher than that of an epidemic. For example, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was the worst pandemic in history, with best estimates placing the number of deaths between 50 and 100 million people in just 2 years. So, how do pandemics occur? Well, a pandemic is usually caused by a new virus strain or through a mutation or subtype of an existing virus, which becomes easily transmissible between humans. Or sometimes it can be bacteria that become resistant to existing antibiotic treatment. Sometimes pandemics are caused simply by the ability for the disease to be spread rapidly, and the high volume modern day global transportation system has increased the likelihood of new diseases being spread rapidly across the world. While the Spanish flu pandemic was the world's worst, it certainly wasn't the last. Since then, we've experienced other pandemics, including cholera, Asian flu, Hong Kong flu, and avian flu. Looking at these more recent examples of pandemics raises some significant concerns. Some viruses are routinely present in animals, but they rarely spread to humans. However, sometimes an event can happen that makes this possible. Swine flu and avian flu refer to viruses that were common in pigs or birds, but not in humans, until a change in the virus itself occurred which enabled it to be transmissible to humans. In recent years, concerns have been raised due to the epidemics caused by viruses linked to small mammals, such as SARS, or by camels, such as MERS, and more recently, monkeys, such as Ebola. Fortunately, these epidemics were able to be contained and prevented from becoming pandemics, but outbreaks continue to occur and on occasions lead to isolated incidents of transmission globally, including here in the UK. Because pandemics are usually created from some new form or variant form of a virus, they're very unpredictable and difficult, therefore, to prevent. The largest Ebola epidemic the world has ever seen affected Liberia and surrounding countries in West Africa between 2014 and 15, killing over 11,000 people. And it was only by a coordinated response on a global scale that it was prevented from turning into a pandemic. Yet despite this huge effort, it still continues to reoccur, with further new outbreaks being reported this year in 2019. So, how big is the danger? Well, if an infectious disease pandemic were to emerge today, the consequences would be far worse than those that were seen during the Spanish flu pandemic of the 1900s. People today are more mobile than ever before, both locally and internationally. They're also more likely to live in overcrowded cities than they were in the past, both of which increase the risk of a virus spreading very quickly. We live in a world of instant communication, both between individuals and communities. This increases the risk of panic when news of a pandemic starts to spread, and increases the chance that people who may be infected will try to travel in an attempt to escape from the disease, potentially taking that disease with them. Despite the best efforts of scientists, it can take months or even years for an effective vaccine to become available. This is because the pandemic viruses are new or original and they have not been seen before. During a pandemic, medical facilities would be very quickly overwhelmed. There could be shortages of trained personnel to deliver medical services, both due to the increase in demand and because staff themselves might become ill or might deliberately decide not to attend for work and to look after their own families. The growing number of casualties during a pandemic would result in the gradual but potentially rapid collapse in normal day-to-day life, such as transportation systems, the manufacturing of goods, and the delivery of men's utility services, and, of course, law and order. Realistic estimates for the ultimate death toll from a global pandemic are difficult to predict, but average government estimates start at a conservative 250 million. Then, of course, there's the additional death toll resulting from the subsequent breakdown in essential services and rule of law. So whichever way you look at it, we're talking about a global catastrophe affecting everyone, no matter where they live. As a prepper, it's quite likely that you already have in mind a number of potential crisis events for which you're doing your prepping activity. And the good news is that whatever those are, the majority of your preps will automatically apply to prepping for a pandemic crisis. But it's worth highlighting a few of these, just for those of you who might be new and starting out on your prepping journey. Every home should have on hand some stocks of water and food and an alternative source of power or fuel ready for when the normal resupply chains or mains utilities start to break down as a result of the crisis event. Everyone should stay informed, regardless of whether there's a crisis or not, and keep up to date with news, both local and international, on social media and the mainstream media news channels. Keep family members up to date with their routine medical exams and any inoculations that they might require. And you should also maintain stocks of medical supplies, especially prescription medicines that family members might be dependent upon, and have on hand some protective items such as gloves, face masks and antiseptic cleaning products. Something that's a little bit more specific to potential for pandemics and diseases is seeking out good sources of travel advice whenever you might be travelling outside of your home region, especially if that travel is to overseas destinations. All governments have some kind of travel advisory websites which are available to the public, and you can download a vast array of good information on both personal security and personal health issues that might be prevalent in the area that you're visiting. You can also check with local healthcare providers, GP surgeries, and get relevant advice on any vaccinations or inoculations that may be needed in the area that you're travelling to. While you're travelling, pay particular attention to personal health during your trip, particularly again if you're travelling overseas. Food hygiene standards and personal safety standards vary dramatically around the world and could be a particular issue in the area where you're travelling. You should also be extra vigilant in respect of contact with both domestic and wild animals, again particularly overseas, and always be aware of the potential for cross-contamination when using mass transportation systems. It's worthwhile just popping some hand sanitizer, liquids and even face masks into your travel bag, particularly if you're going overseas. If you are travelling to a remote area, again be conscious of the reduction in availability of medical services and possibly communication networks in the area that you're travelling to, and make some form of appropriate provision for alternative solutions. Okay, so enough about preparing. What about when a pandemic event actually occurs? Well, the most effective form of protection from contamination during a pandemic is isolation. So keeping yourself as far as you can from other people and other animals or areas which will be unhygienic. At the earliest stage of a pandemic event occurring, you're going to need to make a decision as to where you're going to be living until the event has peaked or recovered. Trying to relocate any significant period of time after the initial outbreak will most likely be either impossible due to quarantine rules or extremely dangerous due to the potential for infection and exposure to reduced levels of law and order. Hopefully, you'll have already made a decision as part of your prepping, but if not, then do it quickly and act accordingly. Communicate widely and try and stay in contact with your family group until such time as your group is complete. If group members are travelling any significant distance to join you, then it must only be during the initial outbreak of the event, and even then you'll need to consider the possibility that by travelling they may become exposed to infection. So have appropriate plans in place to deal with this possibility, including a means of quarantine. Failure to do so could expose your entire group to the unintended exposure to the disease. Implement a strict personal hygiene regime for all members of your group, paying attention to the risks of cross-contamination posed by shared bathroom facilities, gardening or tending to animals. Ensure that any minor medical ailments or injuries are promptly attended to so as to minimise the risk of infection or the condition becoming worse. Monitor group members for potential symptoms of exposure to the pandemic disease and again have a quarantine plan in place. Restrict physical contact with people and animals outside of your group. Implement strict protocols for dealing with visitors to your location to ensure that communication is done at a distance or through physical barriers such as closed windows or an intercom system. It's well worth installing signage at your location entrance to indicate this, along with any other rules or warnings you might want visitors to be made aware of. Don't forget to monitor the news media to gain information regarding the status of the crisis and any advisory notices from government or emergency services. If you have the resources, it's also worth monitoring ham or CB radio traffic for information. But you should exercise some caution, as misinformation might also be being spread for either criminal or exploitation purposes. Resist the temptation to leave your safe area in order to look for supplies or to engage with visitors. Doing so will dramatically increase your risk of exposure. If it's absolutely necessary, then have some decontamination or quarantine protocols in place ready for when the group member returns, and be vigilant to the risk that they may have been followed home by people looking to exploit your group or to steal the things that you have there. Have home security protocols in place and maintain them on a 24/7 basis. Make sure that all group members are informed and engaged in security activities and know what to do for a range of emergency events, such as fires, intruders, or first aid emergencies. Have some form of defensive weapons to hand and make sure that all group members are proficient in the correct use of whatever weapons you have. Given sufficient time, all pandemics will eventually end, as the number of new people to infect gradually diminishes due to death or lack of personal contact. However, the end of the pandemic is not the end of the problem, as it's inevitable that after any significant pandemic, normal daily life and the systems that are required to support it will have ceased to exist. After any significant disaster or crisis, the major risk to life will be the lack of hygiene and sanitation. Rubbish will have piled up in the streets, along with bodies, and normal sources of water will be contaminated. The lack of normal medical services means that what was once a minor ailment could quickly turn into a life-threatening condition. You'll need to be ready to deal with this as you emerge from your place of refuge back into the open spaces, and you'll need to maintain strict hygiene protocols for a long time into the future. Next biggest risk will be the lack of civilized society. Like the rest of the infrastructure we depend upon, the systems for law enforcement will also have collapsed. Depending on the specific circumstances, there may be some form of martial law imposed by what's left of the police or military, but in any sizable country, the government's ability to effectively control all of the country will simply not exist. Widespread gang activity and criminal activity will present a major problem for you in terms of personal security, so you'll have to become self-reliant. Then there's the problem of maintaining adequate supplies of food and water. The normal production and supply chains will be broken, so again you're going to have to become self-reliant through water collection, filtering and purification, and through gardening and rearing livestock. For those of you who might be a little bit sceptical and think that the potential aftermath of a disaster has been somewhat overstated, then consider for a moment what happened in New Orleans, USA, after Hurricane Katrina less than 14 years ago. Here we had a city in the richest and one of the most advanced countries on the planet hit by a single and short-lived hurricane event. Within a matter of hours, the event caused widespread flooding throughout the city, and most of the mains utility services were lost. Half of the city had already been evacuated, yet the death toll was still extremely high. The actual hurricane passed the city in only a day, yet it took 3 days for government relief agencies to get into the city and start distributing essential supplies of food and water. It then took almost a month to set up larger scale relief centres, and after 2 years, only 60% of the normal population had returned to the city and to a somewhat normal life. After 13 years, there are still large areas of the city which have yet to be rebuilt. So with that in mind, consider an event spanning a whole state or a whole country, and consider the ability of any government to cope with it. Well, that's it for this video. I hope that you found something in there that was informative and useful for you. If you did like the video, then please do click on the like button. If you have any questions or comments, we'd always love to hear those, so feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. As always, feel free to click and subscribe so you can find your way back and you can be informed as and when future videos are uploaded. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.